Time is 8:03 a.m. It is Tuesday, July 23rd, and I'm going to call this special city council meeting to order. Would the city secretary please call the roll?
Mitchell,
Here.
Rizzo,
Present.
Ellison, Flores Kale, Bradshaw, here, Parsley, here, Tobias.
Tobias is here. So we have 6 members present. We have a quorum. Next up, citizen comments period. At this time, I ask anyone in the audience who wishes to come forward and speak to please do so. I see Miss Lila Knight. I've got her registered.
My name is Lila Knight, and I just like hearing myself talk. I've been attending Dallas City Council meetings for around 30 years. I've seen really great city councils. I've seen controversy. I've seen the city on the brink of bankruptcy, but I have never seen a city council as bad as this one. There are a few hot points, but not enough to make a difference. Your spending is outrageous. I'm really worried about that. You seem to think there's an unlimited amount of money to spend. You're depending on growth continuing when we really don't know if it will or not. And apparently we don't even have a city manager. And that has not been explained to anyone. So, best of luck, and I wish you all well, but my expectations are not very high. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else wish to come forward and speak? Seeing none, we're going to close citizen comments period. It is now closed. Next up, consider. All right, next up is consider and possible action on the following items. Number 1, road bond election in November 2022. Timeline, key dates, milestones for the City of Kyle bond election, identification of roads, cost estimate for each, project timelines, road selection prioritization, determination of number of bond propositions, and set date to call the bond election. I guess we can start with Norton Rose.
Good morning, Mayor, City Council members. Stephanie Leiby with Norton Rose Fulbright. Just a couple of key points and issues to make you guys aware of. I have brought with me this morning a draft copy of an election ordinance for everyone to review. It's been drafted in accordance with our discussions from last City Council meeting. And so what you'll find within this draft ordinance is 2 separate street propositions, one for existing streets, one for new streets, which each of the projects identified in accordance with our prior discussions. If you turn to Exhibit C of the bond ordinance, you will find the voter information document, and that's the schedule that we discussed at the last meeting that would inform the voters as to the tax rate impact associated with each of the propositions. And so as propositions become set and we have additional guidance, we can work with Mark McCliney and Andrew Friedman at Samco to input all of this financial information so that the council has it. The only other thing that I wanted to make you all aware of, I had some conversations this week with City Secretary about reading requirements associated with ordinances. And just to inform council, there is a provision in the Government Code, Chapter 1201, that provides that a bond election ordinance is effective immediately upon its first passage. And I know that council has a preference for 2 readings of ordinances unless an ordinance passes unanimously. So I just want to make you all aware of that state law provision. If you do want to have 2 readings for the election ordinance and have it passed by council twice, that is permissible, but both of the readings, both of the action items would have to occur within that call window. Okay,
So by
because
August 23rd.
between August 10th and August 22nd.
Okay.
That's kind of the 12-day window, and both readings would have to occur within that time frame. And that's all I have.
Anybody have anything for Ms. Libby? All right. Next would be the K-Friese sections, timeline, identification of roads and segments, cost estimates for each road, and project timeline for engineering, design, and construction. Mr. Canalupo.
I'm sorry. I'm going to share the screen. If I could. Oh, there we go. Are you all able to see that? You have it? No. We had.
Can someone email those to us, please?
And I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. I thought they would have been distributed. Why?
This is our backup material.
It's in the, I'm sending you a PowerPoint. It's the second or third slide. You should have it. So while I can start to explain what we've done between the last meeting and this morning, and today's meeting, and there's a change in the cost of the 2 bonds. One is, I think we mentioned this last time, is that the schedule for developing these 10% plans, these preliminary engineering reports, was very ambitious. And so, we're constantly in this mode of back and forth with the design engineers to make sure that they could get as much information about the projects and what they would cost, and what we know and don't know about the projects as possible. And so between the last council meeting and today, that was one mode of refinement. And so the costs have gone up. I think the last time council met about these 8 projects, the cost was somewhere around $260,000 or $270,000. It's now about, for the 2 propositions, it is about $297 million. And some of that costs have come from the design engineers refining their cost estimates, and then we also had to go back in and include the costs of administering the program, the general engineering consulting, which we hadn't done at that point. And so those 2 things have been done. The other thing I want to note, as that's being sent to you and you start to take a look at it, is we had to assume, all the design engineers assumed that the city or the projects would have to bear the cost of the right-of-way. In other words, none of the right-of-way would be, donated or traded or, given. And we also assumed that all the utilities would be borne by the project. In other words, they hadn't had the time to get into whether or not some of the utilities would be responsible for relocating some of the utilities. And I know that really doesn't allow you to affect your decision because you have to deal with the cost estimates you have, but those are, I think, a couple of important notes, is that we had to assume that all the utilities would be paid for by the project, and we had to assume that all the right-of-way would be paid for by the project. In other words, that none of those things would be able to be borne by others. Whether or not that actually pans out to be true remains to be seen. I would suggest that there is probably some opportunity to have savings on right-of-way and some opportunity to have savings on utility relocation costs. The other thing to note about the costs is that, for the most part, the design engineers used an inflation rate of 4%. There are one or two projects where they use something higher. It's because those projects are shorter in duration, and so the window, that time frame was right up in front of us. And so we know, like today, inflation is really, really high. So for like a one-year project, they used a higher rate. But for the projects that had a higher duration, they sort of pared it down and used, like, say, an average of 4% a year. And we also used a pretty healthy contingency of for the most part, 30%. There are, I think in there someplace, a couple of exceptions. And the reason we use such a healthy contingency is because we're at a 10% preliminary engineering report stage, and you can argue that at this stage of development, and it has really nothing to do with Kyle, it has everything to do with the way things like this get done. Almost, you don't know almost as much as you know, right? There's always, at the beginning of projects like these, there's a little bit of uncertainty. And the way we compensate for that or deal with the risk is you just add a contingency. So there are pretty healthy contingencies. And two things will happen as you go through the design process and head toward construction, and all these things get figured out, all the details get filled in. You'll either eat up that contingency, or have cause to use it, or you'll find that you won't need it and can either put it into other features for the road, or depending on how your ordinance is written and how the bonds go, and I don't know about that, you could put it toward other projects that maybe, you wanted to add stuff to or needed a little bit more of a contingency. So I don't know if you all have that yet. But that's, the timing worked out. I was able to give my introduction while that was being called up onto your screens.
Yep. Is this what you're showing?
This is the one, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. And I know it's obvious when you look at the sheet, but we had organized all the projects in one giant pile last time. This time what we did was we divided it, and I think this is part of the instructions we were given last time. The top are the existing roadway. That would be Proposition 1. Proposition 2 is in the middle, and those are the greenfield projects, more or less. And then just so you'd have it for history and for reference, we included the third, that bottom portion are the excluded projects, and so you could see, what they would cost. So, but you have them all in front of you, Prop 1, Prop 2, and the projects that were excluded. Sorry, Councilmember, you're looking at just the excluded projects only? Right. If you look at the...
Could y'all speak into the mic, please? I can't hear.
I'm sorry, Councilmember. If you look at the bottom right corner of each one of those blocks, you'll see the total for that proposition. So Proposition 1, the total is 173, 740, 934. Prop 2 is 125, 292, 826. And then the excluded projects, and that was what the council member was referring to, the total for the excluded projects is 203, 878, 687.
Comment. So basically on Proposition 1, the existing roadway, you're looking at 7.2 miles in length for that combined. And Proposition 2 is 3.1. Is that what the calculations were with the total mileage?
Yes, council
Between
member.
both?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Other question on BB Road, on Proposition 1, you have the ROW acquisition. Do we have a reason why it's close to almost 8.8 million? Is it just the design of the road itself or the total reconstruction? The right of way?
I'm betting that's because originally it was proposed for BB Road to be moved entirely onto the Caraway Tract, which means that the entire stretch needed to be obtained, and we have since moved that back to BB Road itself. So I'm thinking that number might come down. That's just a guess. I don't know.
It does seem higher than obviously all the other ones.
It's well, all of Kyle, right? You guys know better than I do. It's very expensive, but I think the mayor's on the track. A lot of it has to do with being on the road as opposed to going across like Greenfield.
Can we get costs that do not include the Vibe crossing as well? I thought we had asked for that last time, but
I think you're gonna see it right here. It says bike crossing, it's like Proposition 1, it's $2.2 million basically.
okay. So just subtract that amount from.
Yeah, well, this is just the planner's opinion. The Vibe, that column is all the way over to the right. And as the other council member mentioned, for Prop 1, the cost of the Vibe is just over $2 million over the cost of a $173 million, proposition. And for Prop 2, it's closer to $2.2 million against $125 million.
But if they both pass, then you're looking at almost 2.2 or 4.2 million. So
Right.
it's a high, so that's, I guess that would be my concern, is that now if we combine the two, it becomes a little bit higher.
Yeah,
And
well,
compare-
right.
Right, so comparatively to the roads, but comparatively to like employment or things that we could use for the city, in the amount of $4 million, or even as we've discussed previously, it could be $4 million that we could use for loans that are outstanding that we could use to borrow against the city. So that would be my only concern, is to see if, can we utilize $4.2 million in another way as opposed to the Vibe Trail, because I'm all for the Vibe, but
No, if we take the vibe out, the vibe is done. If we take it out of this proposition on the new road constructions, we need to cancel the vibe. So, and that's fine if that's what the direction of council wants to be, but if we don't build it on these roads concurrent here, then there is no vibe plan. So, originally we discussed, and I don't know if we took action on it or not, but we discussed 15 million as the budget that we wanted to bring for Vibe Trail construction in this current bond. So 4 is significantly less than that, but you've brought it up, so I think maybe we can just have a vote and we can just decide whether we want to remove it. So that would be the simple and easy way to
I would like to
handle
do that, but not with the sense that it's all or nothing, that like if we don't vote on
Okay, well,
4.
explain to me how this doesn't kill the vibe.
Well,
How are we moving forward in the direction of
The
constructing
vibe was created in the beginning of the year. So we had a plan then, and was the plan always just a bond? Because that hasn't even been discussed until right now. So I don't understand what the payment would have been back when we voted on it, how we were gonna pay for it versus to today, where this is the only way we can pay for this.
Well, it's not the only way we can. It's
That's my whole point. That is all I'm saying, is yes, if we take a vote, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And maybe we do it for one and we don't do it for another. I'm saying there's options. I don't want anybody that's voting to feel like if we don't vote on this right now, it's dead. I don't think that's a fair assessment.
It's up to the council, so.
So what would be the funding source for it if we didn't put it in the bond? Would it come out of the general?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not saying that shouldn't be talked about. That would be a question for Perez, I believe, or Jerry, for them to come up with.
Can we put that in a separate item when we take this to the ballot?
We could.
I don't know that we've considered a plan outside of including it in the road bond, but it could be its own separate bond, it could be a general fund, it could be a number of other ways, but I think Pervez and the engineer would probably agree that by including it in a bond, we achieve some economies of scale that would make it cheaper, as well as incorporate the timing.
Right.
And there's a number of advantages to having it in the bond and to be constructed concurrently with the roadways.
Yeah, and if we took the 4 million out, sidewalks still get constructed. They're just not as wide. So that's why I'm saying, like, we're building these roads where the Vibe Trail is planned, and it's complete streets that we're building, and that includes the Vibe in those sections. If we take the 4 million out, it's not like the roads get built with no sidewalks. They just, instead of it being 12 feet, it's reduced to the standard 6 feet or 8 feet or whatever it is. And that just means that section is dead, and so the Vibe wouldn't be connected, and so the Vibe would be, for all intents and purposes,
Mayor,
dead.
if I may, and Jerry, you make a very good point, which is it's for a lot of the elements that are in projects, not just things like the Vibe or the sidewalk. I mean, even utilities or lighting, anything, it's never going to be as cost-effective to put things into a roadway project as it is when you're doing the project. So to go back, for example, and I won't pick on pedestrian stuff, right? To go back and add lighting later on will be a lot more expensive than it is, today when you're just going forth and doing the road. Just think about it if you're building a house and, you have a choice between putting really, really neat cabinets in or adding more space. You might opt to add the space because it's never going to get cheap to add it, right? And there's just some things you can't go back and add cost effectively. The other thing, and I hope you don't mind me offering a planner's perspective, is I think when it comes to bicycle and pedestrian facilities, I think there's a value there that goes way beyond, being able to move just cars. There are people in any community, in any city, that either choose not to drive or can't drive either because they're not physically capable or because they can't afford to. And I think having a well-connected and robust, pedestrian system that is represented by a plan like the Vibe allows people who choose not to drive or who can't drive because they're not physically capable or because they can't afford to, it gives them an alternative mode of travel. And if you think about everything you're trying to do in terms of all the cool growth and development you're planning and how you're trying to connect all parts of the city, I think the vibe goes a little bit beyond, just a straight up, it's, a robust sidewalk system. I think it allows all elements of your population to be able to move around the city if they can't or choose not to use a car.
So why don't we, because it's been brought up a couple times, so why don't we have a motion and a vote so we can put it to bed? Because I have a feeling you're going to bring it up at all the future meetings too, and.
That's fine. If someone wants to do a motion, and then I still do have additional questions, because I don't think it's as cut and dry.
Which, it's your item, so if you wanted to.
So I guess my motion would be to find different funds to build the vibe and not use the bond money for
So
it.
to remove it from the bond
To-
estimate.
What I'd like to see is, I'd like to see it made simultaneously with different funds, but to remove it from the bond.
So not borrow the money, spend it out of cash?
Again, the way that it's funded would have to be discussed on a different level, because I don't think that's something that we can just figure out at this moment. That would be putting a lot of pressure on Perez.
But that is exactly what we would have to do if we remove it from this, if we remove it from this program, and you still want it to go forward, because you're saying it's not killing it, we must find a new funding source, because we are moving these projects.
So correct, so going back, I'm seeing some of these projects are 5 years out, right? So to do a bond, in November that's 5 years out, can we find funds in between now and 5 years, or now and 4 years, or now and when these roads are gonna be completed? So I'm not the one who's saying we have to have a motion. My point is we discuss it, and then if we all agree, let's just keep it in there, I'm okay with that. But we haven't had any discussions, so I'm not sure.
We have had maybe 4, 5, 6 different
Okay, and what
types-
were the
times we've
alternatives?
had to- I'm not, this is exactly where it belongs, in my opinion.
Okay, so again,
it's
but
yours.
if we discussed it, what were the alternatives
It's-
for the
it's your-
funding?
The alternatives are debt or cash. Those are your two options. So if you're saying this is the absolute best place to find the debt, if you don't want to use debt, then you'd have to propose to put it in a CIP.
Perfect. So if it's previously been discussed and it's debt or cash, what does that cash look like?
Very expensive.
I understand that, but if it's previously been discussed, what was discussed as far as where the cash will come from?
The cash would come from the general fund.
Only the general fund, that's all that's been discussed. That's what I'm asking, because obviously I wasn't paying attention during these meetings where it's been discussed. So if you could.
I feel like you're just arguing for the sake of arguing.
No, I'm trying to figure out where
The
the
council
other.
has a will, and the council has the ability to make a decision on this without us going into great,
Well, I would really hate to see it go to make decisions without being discussed, but if that's the way of the council, then I will not argue that.
Well, we've discussed the vibe at every meeting and whether to incorporate the vibe into the road bonds project at least 3 or 4 different times. We've had plenty of time to discuss that.
Agreed.
May I ask, please, to see if you got, I don't know if you have any sort of plot of design where the Vibe crossing will go on Proposition 1? What I want to know is if it's some sort of connectivity. Does it belong on that construction?
So we have the vibe master plan. I have not seen it in the individual tracks, but it's wherever the proposal goes along in the master plan. If we're doing reconstruction or new roads, and that's in the master plan, that would be Vibe Trail.
Okay,
Those
because
sections.
I don't know if it makes sense for us to, let's say we take out the Vibe, which is 1.4% of the total of Proposition 1 and 2. Take that out, and then what are we gonna do in that section? So that's why I would like to see physically where that Vibe crossing will go, if it kind of belongs or attached, is it some sort of connection in those roads. I don't know if it will make sense to take it out. I would love to see a plat for it.
So another thing to consider here is on the developments that are next to these roads that we're reconstructing. A part of the reason it's in the master plan is because when the developments come, we are telling the developers on their section, in order for them to get entitlements, they must construct the Vibe. Vibe is being constructed right now in various sections. So on these roads, when we rebuild them, if we don't build our section of the Vibe, then they will be building, they will be adding costs to their project with no benefit to the community, because the benefit of the Vibe is the connection from one place to the other. So we really do need to we just need to be clear that we either need to move forward with this project or we need to stop it right now. And that's why I keep saying, like, I hear that there's pushback, there's a lack of really a desire to fund it. So, but we just need to get clear, because if we're not going to fund it on these roads, then we need to go back to the developers and tell them they don't need to build the Vibe either. Because if we're not building it on our section and we're forcing them to build it on their section and there's gaps in between the roads, what are we doing? That is not good leadership. So we just need to pick a path here, and I'm okay with, if there's some sense of we don't want the Vibe, then let's take that path. But we must be consistent in our leadership. The Vibe is a multi-year, it's a decades-long plan. It requires consistency of execution of this plan. So.
Okay, so can I ask what happens, because I see BB Road is on there, and there's probably going to be some development on that. So if there's some development on BB Road, what happens if we take out a bond, and how much was BB Road again? Does it say how much the Vibe is going to cost for that?
$770,000.
Okay, so
$770,000.
$770,000. So that's money that the developer would pay.
It wouldn't cost the developer $770, because we would build in our portion a sidewalk, unless you're proposing that we take sidewalks out and then say that the developer has to build the sidewalk. There's no governmental policy to allow for such a maneuver, but we would still be building.
Yeah, no one said that. That was.
Right, but it's not $770,000.
Okay, well, that's what's written on our paper for us, so that's the amount I used.
Right, but I've said, so you said we don't discuss it. The $770,000 is the difference between the regular sidewalk and the Vibe Trail sidewalk. Just like when we did the Public Safety Center, there is a difference between the regular sidewalk and the side sidewalk. So if we take the Vibe out, BB Road will have a sidewalk on it, it just won't be the Vibe, and therefore, in order for us to go back, you have to add the extra sidewalk and all the Vibe features. I don't know what that would cost, but it wouldn't be $770,000 concurrent with the construction of the road. It would be some different number.
Okay, so to confirm, the sidewalk is going to be this regular sidewalk? Because I would think they would be located in two different spots. A sidewalk should usually be like on BB Road along the road, but the Vibe is going to be inside of the track. So is that two different costs then? Okay, so it's, okay. And then, okay, so my ultimate fear is this not passing. I want this road bond to pass. So whatever it takes. My fear is if somebody sees, oh, there's going to be a Vibe Trail, because we're going to have to put a description in all of it. If they don't vote for it because of that, that's going to hurt the city more than having to find alternative funds for the Vibe. My only fear. I'm okay with building it and going forward. That is what it is. But at the end of the day, I want these bonds to pass.
Well, again, I guess what we're trying to get at, Ms. Forskills, is if we take this out, we say, let's just remove this $2 million and we just don't add it to this proposition. Then it gets built. And then 5 or 7 years later, when it's all done, you're going to have so much non-connectivity in different areas of that section. So by adding this, you're already adding the money to fund it now. And just like we're saying, whenever we're building these sidewalks or we're building these roads now, we don't add the sidewalks and the lighting like we have in East Kyle. It becomes more expensive later on because you're going to have to find the money. And it's kind of like saying, okay, let's take the money out, the $2 million out, but then later on when other councils are going to need to get those sidewalks connectivity, we don't know how much more it's going to cost them. So I think it's a matter of, again, from the beginning with the Vibe Trail, or just the trail itself, is to be able to connect from as much as we can from east of Kyle all the way through to where we can maybe someday reduce some of this traffic that we have, whether we're starting to get people to walk out more or ride bikes, or whether if the golf cart scenario works out. I think what I see a lot is that where we're going to get this money from, and this is kind of like adding it to it now versus later on saying, okay, well, we need to go ahead and, if we don't vote on this or we don't support this, then years from now, they're going to have to come back and get that connectivity on these sidewalks, and it may cost the city even more later on. And so I'm just trying to understand I understand your fears that you don't think it's going to pass, but I think this is where we advocate for this to let people know we're trying to get connectivity with sidewalks throughout the city, is the way I look at it.
I think to Councilmember Tobias' point, let's say we build, the regular sidewalk, 5-6 feet, I don't know exactly how much the average one is, but we're gonna have that. Later on, we're gonna have to add, if we're gonna be promoting the Vibe as a way for residents to mobilize without using vehicles, and they wanna bring a golf cart, bicycles, I don't know, then there will be that one particular section that maybe a golf cart won't be able to go through. And so are we gonna have to redesign that? It will probably be an additional cost. So these amounts that we have in here will be that difference, correct? It will be the difference from regular sidewalk to the 12-foot trail?
In some areas, the Vibe is gonna be is not gonna be concurrent. It's not gonna be the same. The Vibe is gonna be on one spot and the sidewalk, there's always gonna be sidewalks and lights. Nobody's asking to take that off. Now, the Vibe trail could be the sidewalk that the city uses or could not be. I'm just gonna make a motion to leave this in here. I would like to make a motion to leave the Vibe in the bond.
Second. All right, it's moved by Councilmember Flores Kell, seconded by the mayor. Is
We're
there
just gonna
discussion
move
on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed. Motion carries 6-0. I have fears about whether this would pass too, but the Vibe is not my primary fear. My primary fear is, number one, the total amount, which would be shell-shocking to some people if they're paying attention. And number two would be the weight of east roads versus west roads in terms of the way our voters vote. It's like probably 70% of the dollars being spent are being spent on east side projects. And so if it was flipped, there would be outcry. I can imagine. I think this is absolutely the right layout of the roads because these east side roads, in particular BB, Bunton, and Windy Hill, are much, much needed, and they're huge projects, but that does not affect all of our residents. So it'll be up to our venerated staff and consultants to help us with the public education so that folks understand the need for these particular road projects. So I think that's probably a greater risk than the Vibe, but we all have our own opinions.
Yeah, it's gonna have to be advertised well. That's all I'm
right.
saying.
But again, to advocate for east of Kyle, it is very much needed. And it's very obvious when you go from one side of the town, the city, to the other. You go by Jackson Hayes Trail and there's street lights and sidewalks and nice ramps and street lights. You go to BB Road and you still have potholes. You have a ditch that you could turn into and fall in. So I understand that there's going to be some voters out there that will choose either side, but I hope if we continue to push the need and the idea that these are much needed roads, I think that the entire city will really look at it as a whole and understand that these are all roads that we all travel, and hopefully we could be able to see that in a positive light.
Yeah, I agree. Do we want to have discussions about one bond versus, or one prop versus two props? Or is there discussion of wanting to take, upon further consideration, wanting to add a project back up from the excluded list or to remove from the existing list? Are we still?
So I'm fine with keeping the projects that we have left off, but my concerns are, the city needs another overpass. We know that it's maxed out at what is it called at that point? 1626 and also here at Center Street. So I worry that if somebody looks and they're like, oh, yes, we need all of these roads in Prop 1, and they vote yes to that, and they're like, but we don't really, we don't really want to approve another 125 million, then they're going to just say no to the overpass. And also, the Marketplace Avenue is really a non-negotiable as well for PD, for the new police station going in. So I'm worried about that too, because this is just gonna delay response times if we don't build that road.
That brings up a very good question. Thank you, Ms. Bradshaw, for bringing that up. Last year, council, or the year before, really advocated for a lobbyist to try to see about how we can get funds for projects within the city. Have we had any updates on any progress on that, and if there's any of that that could be used for future projects that we know of that could maybe help with some of these overpass that Ms. Bradshaw is bringing concerns on? I know that there have been several trips to DC, talking to some of the lobbyists or the people that we hired. Is there any updates on that, Mr. Hendricks, on anything that we could work with them along with TxDOT about assisting us with some of these projects in the future?
Councilmember, I'll have to look into that for you. I haven't had a chance to really get caught up on that part yet.
Okay, I know there was something that council was really hoping to utilize that group for especially road projects, and I know we have the bond here, but I was kind of wondering by now if we heard some kind of master plan from them, because I know Mayor Pro Tem was really adamant that we would be able to work with some of these people to get some projects lined up if possible.
I think the overpasses, or underpass or whatever, I think it is going to be a lift that requires the, Campo and TxDOT and federal funds, potentially. So, what we currently have in the proposal is the full funding for the Kohlers underpass. And it says overpass, but I believe the designs are for an underpass. So if we wanted to try to add so Councilmember Bradshaw, let me ask, are you saying that you are hoping to add the second overpass back into it, or you're saying that you're worried that because it's two propositions, we might choose, that voters might forego the new construction and just do the...
Right, yeah, no, I think the 150 overpass will be a need definitely down the road, but there's so much development and especially just congestion with traffic coming from Austin or Buda in the northern part of the city that it just makes sense to do the overpass there right now. So yes, I would like to see it added to the first proposition. I'm fine with splitting, I'm conflicted. I'm fine with splitting them up, and if we split them up, this makes sense. But if we, if you take the overpass and you move it to the first proposition, then that leaves, relatively, it's a much smaller amount for Proposition 2. I don't know, I don't know. I do know that Marketplace Avenue should be priority. And if we move anything up, I would say that, because PD needs that road.
Marketplace has
I
the
guess for
most.
me,
Go ahead,
real
Robert.
quick, I just want to say, in the beginning, I was in favor of splitting these up, but really what we're telling the voters, we're telling them there's a $167 million bond, $125 million bond. Instead of being completely honest, really what our need is the two bonds combined. These are our biggest projects that we need now. I mean, when you're looking at the commuting times in the city, it's apparent that we need these roads now. We need the overpass. I would really like for council to consider just combining the two bonds, giving the citizens a clear, number, and instead of splitting it up like this. It just feels like smoke and mirrors to me a little bit. I think combining the two, because all these roads on those first two bonds are much needed. And I think we need to just be transparent with the citizens, say, look, this is what we need. This is what the city is proposing because of our study. These are the roadways that are super important, and let's just put one clear number out there. That's just my thought.
I'm gonna say, I know people are mad at the bond that we've already approved and we're just now starting to utilize for the parks.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
upset about that, and that was voted on 2 years ago. So
Right,
I
but
cannot imagine if
Did
we
you
can.
explain to the ones who are upset why the
Yes.
2-year delay?
Yes. So, but my whole point is, if they're mad at a bond that passed 2 years ago, if we combine these, the likelihood of any of it passing is gonna be none. None. I think if we keep it separate, and even if, like Councilmember Bradshaw said, maybe we put RM F-150 West Extension as its own. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I would like to see the residents have, if it were me, we just break it all down. There'd be 15 different bonds, right?
Right,
Which it
but
doesn't
if
make
you-
sense. We know that, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
It makes
'cause
no
You wouldn't vote
sense.
for a road across town.
I'm just telling you,
Yeah.
it would not make sense, but it would be fair, right? It would be most fair what people, and you would get a true, accurate vote on what people want.
Well, wherever the highest concentration of votes in town
There,
are,
I
would be
promise
the
you, you
ones
would get
who
some voters.
vote
You would
yes
get
on
some.
the ones that are on.
This would be a game changer. That's all I'm saying. If you put all these individually, I promise you there'd be additional votes that you have not seen before. My whole point being, if we do two separate, one's probably not gonna pass, maybe not. My hope is they both pass. But if we combine them all, the likelihood of them passing when they see that big number would be
Well,
very low.
Really, it could go either way, because if there truly is an imbalance in voter turnout between east versus west or whatever, then adding an overpass is going to benefit the entire city, could increase the likelihood of a voter voting on the west side of Kyle to vote for the bond if we bulk everything together.
Do it.
So,
Go ahead, do it.
I mean, I don't know.
And
Make
just
that
some
They're either
clarification,
gonna say.
Go ahead, Robert. Sorry.
just some clarification, I was just talking about combining, bond 1 and bond 2.
Yeah, even
And
that's
not
gonna be a big
combining
number.
bond 3 with that,
Do it.
yeah.
The only concern I see with that, well, I understand we all need all these roads like 4 years ago, or longer. But whatever bond passes, we also have to look at the logistics part of it all. That would be a major construction going on in our city with all these roads. And we would also have to have plans to make sure we utilize traffic and reroute traffic in different areas. So we have to look at it also in that, with whatever passes, when the concrete starts getting to be poured, it's going to take, obviously, one I see 53 months, generally, another one's 60 months, 46 months. There's going to be a long time for these residents to have to deal with detours and construction zones. So by adding all of these all together, we have to look at it in that sense for our when it comes to construction, because we'll have sometimes a mess like you have in larger cities where you've got so many roads closed down, and you're trying to get in and out. You've got construction on the east, construction on the west. I mean, just imagine all that. So it's a matter of like what's priority and what can eventually we can work with. And like I had mentioned before, in the next year or two, what do our CIP programs or what do our projects look at to where maybe some of these roads we can do in-house, whether it's the repairs or the reconstruction. Because I know we talked about total reconstruction and we had repairs, and looking at it like that. And that's where we would use our general fund money that's already assigned to the Public Works Department and maybe take one of these roads out that maybe passed or didn't pass, and we can really focus on that. And when we're doing that kind of construction, we can also help or train new employees or employees to be able to build these roads to where they would be able to have that knowledge to where some of these roads, we can have them just fix in-house. And that's kind of how I'm looking at it in those eyes.
Is there a
Well, I don't think we
desire?
have that full of a crew. I'm sorry, I don't think we have that full of a crew yet where we could do underground utilities, do the paving, do the concrete, do sidewalks, everything. That would be a very huge undertaking.
Is there a desire of the council to try and prioritize which of these roads, whether it's
I like
one
that.
prop or two props? Is he frozen? Robert, I think you're frozen. Sorry.
I thought that's what we did the first time when we broke it down.
You're right, we did. And
Well,
honestly, I can go either way, one prop or two props, but I do think that if we keep it to Marketplace should be moved to the first prop.
Well, so if Marketplace, so Marketplace is the one road that has multiple different paths to construction. It's the one road that could be removed from this entirely. So if you're wanting to guarantee and not put it up to the voters, you could just take it out altogether and use TERS 1 revenues. Because this is the first year that TERS 1 is producing the cash flows to borrow the debt, and you could do it. So there are options. That's not really my preference, though, because I think there are potential uses for TERS 1 revenues that might be more interesting to the council than for Marketplace. But
And, yeah. And it's under 1 mile. It's 0.6, and it would take approximately maybe 20 months to complete.
yeah, it can go so fast. The
So-
right-of-way, we've already been in negotiations to trade for that right-of-way. So it goes from a $12 million project to a $10 million project.
So how fast is so fast? Because the Public Safety Center is going to be finished in like 200 days.
Right. Well, when we did our 2013 road bond, the first road to be built was Marketplace because it was all through one owner's land. There was no construction traffic to work around. And it's just utilities, it's just so much easier. That's why it's cheaper and easier. So we can do the Marketplace extension fast. We could kick it off first. There'd be an immediate visibility to the projects. So I want to leave it, but I do think there are other ways to fund that particular project. There are no other ways to fund basically everything else other than this particular path. But my question about prioritization is, is it beneficial to have a conversation with ourselves now and the public about which of these projects we're going to kick off first? Because I'm sure we're going to learn, and we've been being briefed by our financial advisor that while, yes, we can present a $297 million bond with a 9-cent tax increase, really there's only so much capacity within the first few years to kick that off, and we have to wait to kick off the rest. So we're going to have to come up with some kind of strategy for how we're going to lay these roads out, and which are going to go first. My personal preference, I want to just say, is to say no, that we do not. That we say these are all of the priorities. Because if we said, for example, that we did not want to, we wanted Stagecoach to go off last, and we wanted to focus on BB and Bunton and Windy Hill, that might have a negative impact on the turnout. So we need a chance to let the voters decide whether this grouping of projects is the right grouping.
Can we put that in the bond, like a vote for, like, this project first, not just like prop 1, prop 2, and then we know that's where we focus on first.
Well, I think that's where I guess we really rely on our Mr. Barton and his group to do those surveys. To do a survey as far as what they feel the residents would feel in referencing there's 2 propositions, 1 and 2, and the survey would go out and it would hit all of the city, and get the residents involved, because again, they're the ones that matter the most. They're the ones who are going to be driving on the road, and they'll be the ones flipping the bill. That would be a suggestion that I would have, is to put it out there for the residents to say, these are the roads, this is what council's looking at. Is there any input that you would like to add, or comments and so forth? Constructive comments, everyone, about these roads, and hear what they have to say. I mean,
I'm talking about putting out whether or not we want, because in 2013, there was discussions about which roads were going to go first and which roads were going to go last. And that pecking order, if we present that to the voters, folks, it depends on whether the road that goes first is closest to you.
Yeah, well,
So,
obviously,
you know,
yes.
there's some concern that I have. And again, it's about me acknowledging, even though there's no road I have wanted to see reconstructed in this town more than Stagecoach. I have made, and Pervez can tell you just how long I've been pushing to get Stagecoach reconstructed. I do not necessarily think that it should be the road that we send off first, but if you take Stagecoach off the list as the priority project, it's really the only significant road on the west that people use every day that would be motivating for them. And so I just want to be careful about the prioritization selection, which is the next section of this. I'm trying to sort of segue, and would prefer that we adopt a strategy of these roads are all important. We have done surveys. The residents have communicated that all of these roads that we are presenting are important, and they are sort of crowdsourced, I would say. You know, you can see that graphic from our survey that shows the main roads, and it's Stagecoach, Windy Hill, Bunton, Beebe. You know, those are the main ones. I would prefer to just leave it like that, is what I'm saying.
I would like to see a little bit more information derived from less central places, like maybe do an event on the east side and get some feedback over there. When I was watching some of the video, I think in the last meeting for another like gathering of information, a lot of it was done at market days, a lot of it was done at the central, and I get it, it's the central place, but unfortunately, not all of the east side comes to those events. And so to get a fair assessment, maybe we could do something.
Right, but everything I'm talking about right now is for the east side. Every word out of my mouth is for the east side.
I'm not saying that.
Okay.
All I'm asking for is additional inquiries from people who probably don't understand or are aware that we're meeting at Mary Carl Hartson Park to have, a gathering and talk. And whether it's a language barrier or whatever it is, maybe we also hold something on the east side at Lake Kyle.
You're talking about in terms of our public outreach?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a Jeff question, but I would assume they're gonna be all over town.
Can you?
Because that's gonna be important.
I'm sorry, do you work with HOAs as well? Just to be like as localized as possible?
We do. Typically, when we work with bonds, we try and get information directly to HOAs so they can put it out to their members, and then offer to have what we often call pop-up meetings, or small meetings for neighborhood groups or that sort of thing. We would love to get information into the hands of HOAs who have websites or Facebook pages that we can distribute information about the bonds. We'll provide the content, or give them the data at least that they need so they can help share that message.
What if, here's an idea. What if for 1 week, Mayor, if we set up in real time traffic analysis on all these roads? Okay. Traffic analysis is basically seeing how much traffic is coming in at certain times of the day, certain days of the week, and calculate those numbers and see how much traffic is traveled on each one. Because obviously we know surface-wide, they all need to be redone because of the foundation, the infrastructure itself. But if we use that data, that analysis, that would really tell us how much more heavier traffic is being flowed through. And that can give us a breakdown of the amount of cars driven on a Saturday morning versus a Monday afternoon. And that right there could give us numbers of 1,169 cars, whatever it is, on Saturday versus maybe 400, and that can maybe help us identify the most traveled roads to where we can maybe break down to say, hey, look, this could be more of a priority road than the other because of the way it's traveled.
Are
And
you
we-
saying you would want to do that before we called the bond?
To where we can at least, whether it's just a week long before we decide, like the priority, and just that way we could say, and that can also give us real-time information, Mr. Barton, to where when people are saying, well, why is this road more important? Well, according to our data analysis, these roads are traveled more on the weekends or traveled more during the week versus this one. So we're having to look at the higher traffic flow and utilize that information as far as making the decision as far as which one goes first and so forth on that end.
But at the same time, I feel that the busiest roads are probably will struggle first. I don't know if there is a way for us to, what your point is, analyze which one are the busiest one, then before we dig into that, have alternative routes for those drivers to go. By the
Exactly.
time we're gonna block that road for construction.
And you can, exactly, perfect, yeah, because you could utilize all of that data and say, let's say Center Street is more busier than BB Road at certain parts of the day. Well, we could use that, and when it comes down to the proposition, and we could say, these are the roads that are on there, and this is why this is number one. Here's the data, here's the information, here's how much traffic is going through, and stoplights and stop signs, and the amount of time it takes for a car to go through. That also could be used for later on when construction begins. You can say, we're going to go ahead, not only are we going to put this as a priority street, but we've already had pre-route detours ready to go. And to where when the construction begins, this is the time of the day, this is the time of the week where it's the most heaviest, and we can be able to strategize the road closures and everything else from there.
So can I ask a question? So when I drafted what you have as the election ordinance in front of you, I did not give prioritization for roads. I put the roads into the proposition based on the spreadsheet that was provided by the engineer. There was no intent for this to list who goes first and who goes second. If that's the way that it's coming across, I would probably go back and put these roads in alphabetical order, because there really was no intent to say that BB Road went first because it's listed first in the proposition. And that's what I'm hearing from the discussion.
I think it's just a matter of these are the roads in general that would be ready for Proposition 1 and then Proposition 2. And I think maybe internally for us, when we vote to say, okay, these roads got approved, now which one goes first, we use that information, we use that data that we have to when we start the construction itself. Because I think a lot of times, yes, when people see, oh, BB's first, I don't go down that road, I'm not voting for this. But I think it's just a matter of these are the roads in general that are on the proposition that we feel that, we see that is the priority.
Right, but if you never drive BB,
Yeah.
and BB's the road that has the most traffic, and you never drive it, do you want your taxes to go up to pay for it regardless of how bad it is or the traffic? It's not your problem. So and then there's the consideration for the new construction as well, because there's no analysis you can really do for traffic impact there is analysis you can do, but it's not as simple, it's more complicated. Like if we're doing the Seton, the Kohlers overpass to Seton, that's a whole new road that alleviates pressure from BB. And so there's some consideration that has to be made there. It's really just a question, have we got the right roads that are going to connect with the people and make them say yes?
Oh, I think what I was looking at was, let's say Proposition passed. How we decide as a council which goes first, using that data and on that end, and going forward and saying, okay, well, again, maybe Windy Hill was more important than Stagecoach, or Stagecoach was the highest, and then so forth.
Well, I will tell you that's a good question because it's going to be my intention to at least ask the council to consider starting the engineering and right-of-way acquisition on one or two of these projects before the bond, so
Now-
that we've got them underway.
It makes me wonder if we might need to rearrange these propositions and the roads that are in each of them, because maybe what we need to do is have some sort of mixture between new roads and, previous construction, just to allow for the voters to have, not to be so centralized. Okay, I don't drive this road, so I'm not voting for this. I don't know if that makes sense. To have a mixture of new and all construction in Proposition 1, at the same time doing a study of like whatever we're doing first, we're going to create an alternate route for the next roads that are gonna be added for the next proposition. Does that make sense, what I just said? I'm not sure.
It made sense, but I think that's what we did. Well, what we did was we separated on purpose, and what it sounds like you want is for us to mix them so there's not, so people are like, oh no, I don't ride that, so I'm not gonna do it, but we know that there's a need. So my suggestion is gonna be that maybe we talk to somebody who knows about this, who's an engineer, who has knowledge, who could look at a map and guide council, and not just sit here individually as people who ride certain roads, but maybe go to our leadership and ask them their professional opinion. What I'm trying to say is, Leon, what do you think? Because that's important to me. I do a lot of things in life. I don't engineer.
Well, just so long as you don't ask our leadership on the staff level to perform political analysis on our behalf.
Oh, no, that I would be highly disappointed if that's the response that I received.
Okay.
And I probably wouldn't ask that if I felt like my staff member would give that back to me. And we could also even obtain additional, if Leon's like, this is beyond my scope and this is a huge bond and he's nervous, he can also obtain, hopefully, additional outside information to help us make this decision. I trust you, Leon.
I think that was a question to you, Leon. I'm not exactly sure, so.
My goal is to put focus on the experts, the people that we hire, and we can trust to make these decisions to guide us into making the best choice.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Leon Barba, city engineer. Council member, I've been thinking about this whole project since it began, and I think the biggest issue that I'm foreseeing is exactly what you're asking me to do, is which one goes first, because if you think about it, we only have, there are limited resources for moving utilities. There's limited resources from PEC to move their lines and stuff. So we're going to have to coordinate with them to tell them this is the road that we want first. And they're going to have to concentrate on that road, do their engineering, do their relocations and all that kind of thing that they have to do to get these roads ready for us to rebuild. So the roads that we pick, Mayor, I think you're right. Marketplace is going to go first. It's just, it did on the last bond election. It wasn't supposed to be the first one on the last bond election, if I remember correctly, but it went first because it was greenfield. It was easy to rebuild that road. We can look at these and see if we can come up with a recommendation, but it's going to be tough. And again, I'm not looking at politics. I'll be looking strictly at engineering. What's the best one to try to hit first? Looking at the possible detours that we're going to have for those particular roads and see what makes sense from an engineering side.
Yeah, and maybe if we gave him some more guidance, like what roads are going to connect Kyle in the best way. And maybe it's not BB Road, and I understand they need those roads updated, but our goal, I think, in updating our roads is to make Kyle more connective and not having a 30-minute drive for, 2 miles. So maybe if we gave additional, and that's just my opinion, if we want to collectively tell Leon what it is that we want to focus on, that will make his job easier.
Now you're talking, I agree. But I have thought about this for a long time in these roads too, and I have opinions about which roads I think we should kick off first. What I'm trying to say is I don't want to have that discussion now because I think that's not necessarily in the best interest of the bond.
So not to put it on the bond.
Correct.
Okay.
I
agree.
think we need to just lay out this is the scope, this is the cost, this is the tax rate impact. Give everybody hopefully something that they, that will impact every citizen in a positive way to give them a reason to vote for it. And then once we have that, then we can move forward. But then also, as we're getting started on this, determine potentially one project or two that we think that we know we're gonna move forward with, and then we could start the right of way and engineering of that particular project, but not necessarily right now, if that makes sense.
Well, it should be brought back for sure, and it should be a discussion. And again, not for the bond, but a discussion in general, and it should be voted on
yeah.
in general. And I would like to see Leon have really good direction to make his job easier.
Yeah, I agree. We're on the same page there. Go ahead, Jeff.
Mayor, several council members have asked, could we do something in the public engagement to really seek out citizens' opinions on that? And I think there is a way to combine some of that. I think it would be very difficult to do before you call the bond. And it'd be hard to get any kind of meaningful engagement, get that back, and leave you all opportunity to call your bond on time. And there are some problems, as you said, unless you can explain the full context to people, then people misread those priorities. It can lead to some problems in the election. But I think we can include some interactivity in some of those, or some other questions that let people express their concerns or express their views on where priorities need to be or how mobility is. That gives you some additional information that you could use in the following months as you struggle with how to prioritize.
And our public outreach will definitely be able to have it. So let's say, we have really two questions we need to answer here. Is number one is, what is the scope of, are we good with the projects that we've proposed? And then number two is one proposition or two. I've heard arguments for both, so we might want to consider focusing on those and maybe taking votes on that, because I think that's the vote that we need so that staff can present to us. It's really hard and complicated, and nobody's going to necessarily feel perfect because we're trying to predict the future here. I would prefer to hear from Jeff and Pervez one prop or two from their respective fields and their opinions, and then we can try to take a vote on that.
I would like to hear from Leon too, to see if you consider Proposition 1 makes sense, Proposition 2 makes sense, or do we need to be swapping some of those projects in between propositions? I don't know if you have to review it or.
Councilmember, I was in operations and maintenance for about 13 years, and obviously my preference would be let's fix the old roads first. But I also see the advantage of providing new routes for folks to be able to use to get some of that traffic off the existing roads and spread the traffic around, so to speak. So it's, again, my preference would be the existing roads, but that's just because of my background with operations and maintenance for so many years that we couldn't keep up with operations and maintenance. It was just difficult because you had to repair roads under traffic. That's not a lot of fun. It's tough. So new roads, they're easy to build because there's nobody in your way. That's why these subdivisions get built so fast. There's nobody out there to stop you from, you don't have to worry about traffic control. You just go out there and build your road and you're done. So that would be my preference.
Thank you.
I was hoping y'all wouldn't ask me that question. It is strictly a council decision. As staff, we will support and make it work, whether we have one prop, two prop, or individual props. So that being said, the more options voters have, the better to make their decision. As a voter myself, not in Kyle, but another jurisdiction, that's what I would like to see on my bond propositions.
Perez, just real quick, would you leave Prop 3 off because it's the smallest one and voters could be inclined to go after that real small number and not look at what the road would? are? Or would you go with Prop 1 and 2? Just Prop 1 and 2 is what I'm asking.
What are you calling
And it's
Prop
open to
3?
anybody there.
Oh, the very last one.
Yeah,
the
Mayor-
150 West Extension.
Mayor Pro Tem, I don't think we were considering that as a proposition. I think
Okay.
that was just, those were just roads
Yeah,
we
it's-
categorized as.
It's the largest,
Okay,
not the
I
smallest.
thought I heard a council member say that we were adding Prop 3. That's why it worried me when I saw that small number.
Oh, I see.
Okay,
No, it's just excluded from the bond and is
1 and 2.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
It's actually,
just making sure. Thank you.
Out of curiosity, do we know how many lanes Center Street to Veterans Drive is going to be?
Did you just look over here somewhere? I don't think
I don't
they're
think it's up
proposing
there.
necessarily to add lanes,
Okay, it's just going to
But-
say 2.
but it would just be. Re-
2 lanes with a center turn.
Yeah, because the thing is, more options is good for voters because that gives the voters the ability to be more selective. And being more selective allows for different voter groups to decide and shape outcomes of votes. It goes all the way to the argument of, let's put every road out there and let the voters pick and choose each one, which will weigh the outcomes based on population centers and voting blocks. So it's a scale, so I'm not.
So,
Mayor,
Mr.
Council,
Go ahead.
listen, I agree with Pervez that it's a council decision, but I will offer some insights maybe from working with other jurisdictions. I think there's a lot of truth to what Pervez says, that voters really like to see multiple propositions. I'm not sure, though, that leads to voters voting for multiple propositions. While voters like that, as you said, Mayor, what we have seen sometimes is that leads to different voting blocks in a community than lining up behind their side of the community or for their particular roads. Looking at just recent history in Central Texas, I thought that might be useful to the council. We just worked, as you all know, in Pflugerville, Cedar Park, Buda, Hayes County, up and down the corridor on road projects. So all of those communities struggled with this same issue. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. I will say that most of them ended up choosing one proposition for transportation. They went with one proposition for, say, if they were doing parks and rec as a completely separate issue, building new parks, one for drainage, one for facilities, as you all have done, such as law enforcement, and then one for roads. Pflugerville passed one for roads in 2020 with 68%, Cedar Park in 2022 with 70%, Buda in 2021 with 74%, Hayes County in 2016, 60%, Austin in 2018, 81%, although that was a limited road project, and the big Austin Road project in $720 million in 2016 for 59%. This last year in Live Oak, about 67%, just down the corridor in San Antonio. So there does seem to be a critical mass in the region of people who really want to see transportation improved wherever you are. This is a big amount for Kyle. So again, I don't think there is a right or a wrong answer. From the strictly the public education or the public outreach perspective, there's a real benefit to be able to say, hey, you've got choice. I think that will play well with some people. There's some real complication to trying to explain the questions that will inevitably arise. Well, what happens if we pass one but not two? Or what happens if we pass two and not one? If maintenance are your priority but the new roads pass, then that's complicated. And trying to explain that to individual groups, or as you talk to HOAs, that gets a little more complicated. So I think it's not that we can't do it, it's not that we aren't happy to do it, but if you try to talk about the overall system of connectivity throughout the city and the overall network of connectivity throughout the city, then I would say it's a little bit easier to explain that in a website and have maps that show that ultimate connectivity as a single combined entity. And again, I just want to emphasize that I don't think there is a right or wrong answer. There's a lot of factors to weigh there, and you all are the experts on that.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not an expert.
Joe, maybe, do you have anything to add to that, Joe? Or?
Let's vote. Let's take a vote on it. I don't know that there's much else to discuss, because that's the same thing we said last time. Actually, we came to the agreement that we did, so we need to actually take an affirmative vote to change it. So if somebody wants to try to combine these, we'll need to have a motion and a second. Otherwise, the layout is set, because we took votes at the last meeting.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to combine Proposition 1 and Proposition 2.
All right, second.
Second.
Great, I think we're gonna be split on this. All right, so, motion's made by Councilmember Bradshaw, second by the mayor, that we split, that we combine propositions 1 and 2. Is there discussion on that motion? All right, I've got my eye on everyone, so all those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries 4-2.
Aye.
I do like the aye and nay. That does make it clear for the delay. So.
The vote was to combine them, so there's not two propositions, there's gonna be one. So either all the roads pass or none of them. It was 4-2, so me and Tobias voted nay, and everybody else voted yes.
So I think,
That's okay. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes.
I just want to thank everybody for the healthy conversation today. It was a really good conversation. I think we learned a lot, and we were able to come together here. And the vote went 42.
So you need to rewrite the ordinance then to include just one proposition?
Oh, sure.
And then we'll have to come back and vote on that to adopt.
So everything else should be this, I can read this and everything else is gonna be the same, except for it'll be one?
Yeah, we have a month.
So basically, you'll just have your Proposition A. I'll remove new streets, existing
Okay.
streets, and then I'll list all of the road projects within that one. I mean, the proposition language itself will stay the same, and the list of road improvements that are called out will just be expanded to include all of them.
Yes.
Out of curiosity, if this doesn't pass, we can separate it next year and then vote again, right? Well, because the way it's being presented now is all of them. But that's not gonna be the same bond as if you separate it and make it different.
Right, so if this bond election does not pass, the city would be prohibited from issuing certificates of obligations for any of the enumerated road projects for the next 3 years. But that doesn't stop the city from calling another bond election. So you can call a bond election for May and you can call a bond election for November. And so if the bond proposition does not pass, you can call another streets bond proposition
With the same streets?
with the same streets.
Okay,
The
Yeah.
prohibition
So-
only applies to certificates of obligations.
okay.
Would a TERS revenue bond be considered a certificate of obligation?
No, but a certificate of obligation paid from TERS revenues would
Right,
be
but a
prohibited.
TERS revenue
But a TERS
bond-
revenue bond would not be prohibited.
Okay,
So that could be marketplace, right? Okay, if necessary.
if worse comes to worse. Professor will love that.
Yeah.
It's an inside thing. All right, well, let's talk tax rate.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Andrew Friedman with Samco Capital Markets, Mark McCliney's business partner. The back of your packet, we put together just a simple 3 slides outlining what we're calling option 1 and option 2. To kind of go through this, they're strikingly similar. So I want to just briefly discuss what those similarities are and what underpins the analysis that drives these 2 options in terms of the tax rate impact. One, the city's experience over the last decade an average of 15.12% growth experiencing roughly 33% growth in this current year. In future years, where we're considering the tax rate impact of this bond project over the course of a decade, we consider 5% growth annually for the first 5 years, and then 2% growth into perpetuity. If you consider that inflation historically is between 2.9 and 3.1%, that growth we would certainly consider to be conservative. The projected taxable values that also underpin this are inclusive or exclusive of the additional homestead exemption that you all most recently adopted. So with that, we then consider how to achieve the full financing if approved by the voters. In this case, it was $279 million. Based on the numbers we're looking at this morning, that'd be $299 million. The result is very much manageable within what we're discussing here, though, of a potential 8.2 cent tax rate increase. 8.2 cent tax rate increase in order to achieve the full financing that we project by August of 2030. You'll recall that your city charter will allow for that authorization to remain in effect for a decade. So we have to get any of the bonds that we're going to issue issued before 2032. In each of these scenarios, you get there by 2030. So the difference between the two analyses is how quickly we can issue that full authorization. And so if you look at option one, we consider the issuance of $40 million in 2023, presumably next August. You issue before you're adopting your tax rate. We'd have new taxable values at that point, followed by a $100 million bond issue in 24, $70 million in 2027, and the remaining authorization in 2030. Option two is simply slowing that down. If either taxable values aren't increasing at as quick of a rate as projected, you slow those bond issuances down, either by delaying them or by issuing smaller amounts of bonds in those years. So option two considers issuing $40 million in 2023, $80 million instead of the $100 million in 2024, $80 million in 2027, and $79 million, that remaining balance, by 2030, all while achieving that goal, which is keeping the total tax rate below 59 cents. So to the extent that you can't achieve this full bonding over the course of that decade and remaining within that 59-cent, call an informal goal in the future rate, there'd be money remaining to be authorized, perhaps, or not authorized, but issued after 2030, but certainly before 2032, when that authorization from the voters would expire per the charter. We tried to estimate interest rates on the higher side, between 4.75 and 5%. In today's market, we're probably just below 4% on these financings. And again, this takes into consideration that homestead exemption. So with that, we can certainly go through and revise the bonding to reflect the discussion this morning, but we feel comfortable with proceeding with that underlying analysis, and I'll certainly continue to update this with Pervez. Every year that your taxable values come out, and certainly, look at next year, for instance, assuming the taxable value increases by 5%. Well, we've been experiencing well north of that. Every year in the early years that we get bigger growth than what we're estimating within this analysis helps all subsequent years. If we get 15% growth next year, that creates that future capacity, but certainly no one has a crystal ball to know where the economy will go from here. So we're trying to be as conservative as possible, because certainly you're going forth to the voters in your communications and making an informal promise, as it were. So we want to be as conservative as we can.
So there's no votes that need to be taken here, because we've already outlined the direction. It seems basically what I'm hearing is that you're saying the direction that we've been on, you're proposing to continue, and we have a sense of the schedule. And
Absolutely.
A lot of this schedule will depend on the growth, and we can speed it up, we can slow it down, but it's all manageable. I do think that it's an interesting story. The number is so much higher that we're asking the voters to approve, and yet the tax rate impact is 1/3 of what it was in 2013, when we asked them. So as far as which group of people were spending the money more out of control, yeah, the group behind the 2013 bond, you could make that argument, those that supported it back then. So, but either way, the public outreach would be that in 2013, we proposed a very similar schedule, and the actual tax rate impact was 4 to 5%. So that is a good form of education to help, I think, get voters more comfortable with this. And then also the conversations about being able to slow it down depending on market analysis, and keeping tax rate under 60 cents, I think, is still good. So,
And certainly the logistics of how you're able to construct these projects is going to play into how the bonds are rolled out. There's IRS limitations that want to see the city, when you borrow money, to largely spend it within 3 years. So we don't want to go out, even if we could borrow $299 million, there's probably not a feasible way to construct that much project. So we wouldn't be advising to proceed with that much anyway. So there's lots of facets to this that are constantly under consideration from the construction and engineering side, and also the financing side.
well, I think it would be difficult to borrow to issue the 40 million in 2023 with a November 2022 election. I think it'd be probably difficult for us to borrow much of anything in that very first year, but 40 million is a lot. I mean, so, we're not gonna have any of the roads projects ready in that first year. It'll all be design and engineering, so it's kind of exciting. The 40 and the 100, even if we get behind and it's 2024, 2025, maybe that it grows, but if the voters approve, we are gonna be able to green light multiple projects and really see some action here within just a few years' time. So that would be pretty exciting to me.
Pervez, have I left anything out that you'd like me to cover that haven't considered?
No, you're good. All right. Anything else we want to discuss? I think we got it. Well, I guess that's going to conclude the workshop portion. We still have an executive session. So if there are no other objections, we're going to move on to executive session and dismiss our consultants and staff that are not a part of it. So thank you all for coming. Appreciate it very much.
Happy to play our part.
Have a good weekend.
You guys too.
All right, pursuant to Chapter 551 Texas Government Code, the City Council reserves the right to convene into an executive session from time to time as deemed necessary during this meeting. City Council may convene into executive session pursuant to any lawful exception contained in Chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code, including any or all of the following topics. Possible purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real estate pursuant to Section 551.072, downtown property acquisition. Personnel matters pursuant to Section 551.074, appointment of city manager. We are in exec. All right, I'm gonna, time 10:17 a.m., I'm gonna call this meeting back to order. There was no action taken during executive session. There will be action taken now. I'd like to make a motion to approve an earnest money contract for the purchase of the property located at 110 Center Street in the amount of $500,000, and authorize the mayor or city manager to execute all documents needed to close on the purchase of the property.
Second.
Motion by the mayor, seconded by Councilmember Tobias. Is there discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 6-0. I would like to, also like to motion to place our city manager, Mr. Scott Sellers, on paid administrative leave pending investigation of an internal complaint, and to appoint Jerry Hendricks as acting city manager.
Second.
Motion by the mayor, seconded by Councilmember Parsley. Is there discussion on that motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Second.